Welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking at excerpts from books that changed the world, how words sparked revolutions, changed laws, and inspired movements.
Hmm.
And, well, the title kind of says it all. We're going to be looking at books that actually shaped history.
Yeah, it's really amazing how these books were catalysts. They transformed ideas into real, tangible changes, sometimes globally. It really gets you thinking about how powerful the written word can be.
It does. To start off, let's look at a pamphlet that actually sparked a revolution. Common Sense by Thomas Paine, published in 1776.
You can imagine, back then, this pamphlet sold over 100,000 copies in just 6 months, and there was no social media or anything like that. What made it so popular was that Paine could connect with ordinary colonists. He wrote in really straightforward, accessible language. He presented the case for independence in a way that resonated with people.
So it was like the 18th century version of going viral. And it even helped shape the Declaration of Independence. It's crazy to think a pamphlet could have that much influence. Makes you wonder what writing today could have that kind of impact.
Yeah, for sure. What made Common Sense so effective was not just the message, but also how Paine framed it. He tapped into colonists' frustrations with British rule, and then he offered them a clear path forward, toward action.
Okay, so next we have Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, which is another powerful book that really pushed social change. Came out in 1852, just before the Civil War. And this novel showed a lot of people the horrors of slavery.
It's amazing what Stowe accomplished. She used really compelling storytelling to show enslaved people as human beings, and this forced readers to confront the terrible reality of slavery. It wasn't just some abstract idea anymore. It was about real people, their families, their pain.
Exactly. And it really changed public opinion. I mean, there's that famous story of President Lincoln meeting Stowe and calling her the little lady who made this big war. Can you believe that? A book that actually helped start a war.
It really shows how deeply people were moved by Uncle Tom's Cabin. It really got the abolitionist movement going and added to the already growing tensions over slavery. This wasn't just a story, it was a force for change.
So far, we've seen how words can cause revolutions and reveal social injustices. Now let's talk about a book that still sparks debate, The Communist Manifesto, which Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote in 1848.
This book came out of the huge social and economic changes brought on by the Industrial Revolution. Imagine a time of super fast technological progress, but also tons of poverty and inequality. That's the situation Marx and Engels were in when they wrote their critique of capitalism and imagined a communist society.
So they weren't just writing some random theory, right? They were responding directly to what they were seeing around them.
Exactly. The Communist Manifesto was a call to action, urging the working class to stand together and overturn capitalism. It gave people a way to understand class struggle and offered a radical vision for a fairer future.
And it had a global impact, didn't it? It influenced revolutions and shaped government policies for decades. It's mind-blowing how much one book could change things.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is that the Communist Manifesto is still relevant today. In our world today, with problems like income inequality and so much wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, Marx and Engels' critique of capitalism still makes sense to a lot of people. So the debate about the role of government, how resources should be shared, and what our economic systems should look like in the future, that debate is still very much alive.
It shows that the conversation about social and economic justice is far from over. And the ideas in these books are still very influential. Now let's switch gears and talk about a book that was crucial to the development of modern feminism. A Vindication of the Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft, published all the way back in 1792.
This book was truly ahead of its time. Wollstonecraft, she boldly questioned the common belief that women were just naturally inferior to men. Can you imagine how brave she had to be to challenge these deep-rooted social norms back then?
It's pretty incredible. It must have taken so much courage to write and publish something so radical.
She argued passionately that women deserved education and equal rights. She insisted that women, just like men, can reason and are capable of intellectual things. She didn't want women to be seen only as wives and mothers. She wanted them to be recognized as individuals with their own choices and potential.
That's so powerful. And her ideas really laid the groundwork for all the feminists who came after her.
Yeah.
It's like she planted a seed that grew into a massive movement for equality.
Exactly. And that's what's so inspiring about these books. They can ignite change across different generations. A vindication of the rights of women still resonates with those who are fighting for gender equality today. It's a reminder that the fight for justice requires incredible courage and a willingness to challenge the way things are.
It shows that even one person's voice can have a huge impact. Now let's look at a book that really kicked off the modern environmental movement. Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, published in 1962.
Think about the 1950s and 60s, a time when people were very optimistic about technology, but also starting to worry about how humans were impacting the environment. Carson's book was like a wake-up call. It was a serious warning about how pesticides like DDT were devastating ecosystems and harming human health.
It's amazing how she connected all the dots and made these complex scientific issues something that everyone could understand. Did people even talk about the dangers of pesticides before Silent Spring?
Not in a big way. Her book completely changed the game. It made people really angry, and that led to DDT being banned in the United States. And it also inspired the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. It totally changed how we think about our relationship with nature.
It shows you how powerful science communication can be. Carson proved that even difficult scientific ideas can be made easy to understand and interesting to the public. And that can lead to real change in the world. Now, get ready, because we're going to enter a scary dystopian world. George Orwell's 1984, which was published in 1949.
Imagine a world where Big Brother is always watching you,
Mm.
where it's a crime to think freely, and where history is constantly being rewritten to fit what those in power want. That's the terrifying reality that Orwell created in 1984. It's a powerful warning about the dangers of totalitarianism.
It's scary to think that some of what Orwell imagined has actually come true in our time, with all the surveillance technology and misinformation spreading around. It makes you wonder, have you ever felt like your privacy is disappearing in this digital age?
That's a really valid concern. Orwell's novel is a powerful reminder that we need to protect our freedoms. We have to protect our privacy and fight back against any attempts to control information. It challenges us to really think critically about the world and be vigilant about defending democracy.
It's definitely one of those books that sticks with you long after you've finished it. Okay, up next, we're going to look at a deeply personal story that has touched millions of people. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, published in 1947.
Imagine being a young girl forced to hide during one of the most terrible periods in history. Anne Frank's diary, written while she and her family were hiding from the Nazis, gives us a raw and moving glimpse into how hatred and intolerance affect real people.
It's such a powerful reminder that the human spirit can be so strong, even in the face of unimaginable hardship. Anne's words, full of hope and even humor, even in such a difficult situation, are truly inspiring.
The Diary of a Young Girl has been so important in teaching people about the Holocaust. It makes the tragedy feel real and encourages empathy and understanding for the victims. Anne's story goes beyond the specific time and place of the Holocaust. It reminds everyone of the importance of tolerance, compassion, and the need to oppose all forms of discrimination.
It reminds us that even in the darkest times, there's always hope, and that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a big impact. Now get ready for a total mind shift as we explore a book that revolutionized our understanding of nature, On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, published in 1859.
Imagine a world where everyone believed that all species were created independently and never changed. Darwin's incredible work shattered that belief. He introduced the theory of evolution by natural selection, and that forever changed how we see life on Earth.
Reading Darwin for the first time was a real mind-blower for me. It completely changed how I understood life on Earth. Have you ever had a book do that to you?
Absolutely. Darwin's work challenged so many long-held beliefs. It sparked tons of debate. But in the end, his careful observations and convincing arguments won over the scientific community. His ideas became the foundation of modern biology and influenced everything from genetics to ecology.
It's amazing to think about how much one book changed our understanding of the natural world. It shows you the power of scientific inquiry to reshape our whole worldview. Now let's delve into another groundbreaking work that challenged social norms and ignited feminist thought. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, published in 1949.
De Beauvoir's incredible book explored the way society turns women into the other. It defines women in relation to men and puts them in a secondary position. It was a bold and honest examination of gender roles, oppression, and the struggle for women's liberation.
It's amazing how the second sex is still relevant to the conversations we're having today about gender identity, equality, and dismantling patriarchal structures. It's a book that sparked a movement and is still inspiring feminists today.
Yeah, what's really insightful is how de Beauvoir looks at the historical and cultural factors that have shaped women's experiences. She shows how these factors contribute to the ongoing problem of gender inequality. Her book is a call to action, urging us to challenge these norms and create a world where women are truly empowered and free from discrimination.
It reminds us that the fight for gender equality is far from over, and that we all have a part to play in building a more just and equitable world. Okay, last but certainly not least, let's talk about a book that tackled the issues of racial injustice and moral courage in the American South. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, published in 1960.
This beloved novel tells the story of Scout Finch. She's a young girl growing up in the racially charged Deep South, and it's also about her father, Atticus Finch, who's a lawyer defending a black man who's been falsely accused of a crime. It's interesting to see how the struggle for racial justice continues across generations. While Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed the horrors of slavery, To Kill a Mockingbird tackles the subtle ways prejudice operates even in a seemingly more civilized society.
It's a powerful reminder that prejudice can be sneaky and that the fight for equality is far from over. To Kill a Mockingbird makes us face some uncomfortable truths about our history and look at our own biases.
And its impact goes beyond the historical setting. It raises really important questions about justice, empathy, and doing the right thing. Even when it's hard or unpopular, it makes you think about how far we've come and how far we still need to go, you know?
Absolutely. It reminds us that we all have a responsibility to fight injustice and build a more equitable world.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how books can spark real change in the world, sometimes in ways that authors never even imagined. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. And what's even more amazing is how these books are still relevant today. Even hundreds of years later, they speak to issues we're still dealing with. It's like they tapped into something timeless about being human.
Absolutely. Their insights into politics, society, even human nature, they go beyond the time they were written in, and they offer valuable lessons for us now in the 21st century.
So let's jump back in and see how these books still connect with modern readers. First up, common sense.
Mhm.
It's wild to think that a pamphlet from over 200 years ago can still be relevant today.
I know, right? What's striking about Common Sense is its timeless appeal to reason and individual liberty, Paine's arguments for self-governance, for people's right to decide their own fate. They resonate in any time when people are fighting for freedom and autonomy.
It's like he created a blueprint for democratic ideals, the kind of ideals that still inspire people all over the world. Think about all the movements for democracy and self-determination happening right now.
Absolutely. Think about the recent protests for democracy and insert current event example. You can see echoes of common sense in what they're demanding. More political participation, transparency, accountability from their governments. Paine's ideas are very much alive in those movements.
It's inspiring to see those principles still motivating people. Okay, now let's think about the lasting impact of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Slavery might be over, but the book's exploration of racism and the fight for equality is still sadly relevant.
You're right. Uncle Tom's Cabin was a turning point in how people saw slavery. It made readers face the brutal truth about it, not as some political issue, but as a human tragedy. The way Stowe described enslaved characters like Eliza and Uncle Tom, it helped readers see them as real people, readers who might never have thought about their suffering before.
And started a national conversation about race and equality that's still going on. But the fight for racial justice didn't end with the end of slavery, did it?
Sadly, no. You can still see the effects of slavery's legacy in the systemic inequalities we have today. Things like mass incarceration, disparities in healthcare and education. Marginalized communities are still dealing with the consequences of centuries of racism.
It's heartbreaking that these problems are still around. Stowe's novel reminds us that the fight for racial justice needs constant attention. We have to be committed to taking apart systems of oppression.
Exactly. It's a call to action. We have to challenge racism in all its forms and really work towards a society that's more just and fair. It's not enough to just acknowledge the past. We have to actively build a better future.
Okay, let's revisit the Communist Manifesto. Most communist governments have collapsed, but the book's criticism of capitalism and economic inequality still resonates, especially now with wealth disparities growing and social unrest increasing.
Well, Marx and Engels really went after capitalism. They argued that it naturally creates huge inequalities and exploits the working class. And in many ways, they were right. We're seeing those same problems today, even if they look a bit different.
Yeah, we're living at a time where the gap between the rich and poor is getting bigger and bigger. It makes sense that people are turning back to the Communist Manifesto and finding its critique of capitalism relevant.
Exactly. Think about the global financial crisis back in 2008. That really shook people's faith in capitalism, and it brought economic inequality to the forefront. And since then, we've seen the rise of populist movements driven by economic anxiety and resentment.
It's a sign that the problems Marx and Engels talked about haven't gone away. Their work makes us wonder if our economic systems are really working for everyone or just a select few.
Exactly. It encourages us to think critically about the foundations of capitalism and to look for alternative ways to build a world that's more just and sustainable. The Communist Manifesto might be over 170 years old, but the questions it raises about power, wealth, and equality are still important today.
Now let's go back to a vindication of the rights of women. It's amazing how Wollstonecraft's arguments for gender equality are still so powerful after all this time.
Wollstonecraft was a true pioneer. Her arguments for women's education, her insistence that women should have the same opportunities and freedoms as men, those ideas were radical back then, and yet here we are, centuries later, still fighting for the same things. It's both inspiring and disheartening, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's incredible to see how far the movement for women's rights has come.
Hmm.
But it's also sad to realize we're still dealing with many of the same issues Wollstonecraft wrote about centuries ago.
Right. Think about the gender pay gap, the lack of women in leadership positions, the ongoing struggle to make sure women and girls all over the world have equal access to healthcare and education. These were all things Wollstonecraft cared deeply about.
And we can't forget the fight against violence against women and the sexism and misogyny that women face in so many parts of their lives. These problems are deeply rooted in patriarchal structures and cultural norms that have been around for centuries.
Wollstonecraft's work reminds us that achieving gender equality takes constant effort. We have to be willing to challenge those deep-seated patriarchal norms. It's a call to action. We have to dismantle systemic barriers and build a world where women truly have equal opportunities and freedom.
Okay, next up, Silent Spring. Rachel Carson's warnings about environmental damage are even more urgent today. We're facing climate change and biodiversity loss.
Carson was ahead of her time. She understood how everything in nature is connected, and she saw the delicate balance of ecosystems. All this long before it became a major concern. Her work was a powerful call for environmental stewardship. It reminds us how much human actions affect the health of our planet.
And her insights about the dangers of pesticides and the need for sustainable practices, they still guide environmental movements today. It's amazing how her work, which focused mainly on DDT, has become so relevant to the whole environmental movement.
I think it's because she tapped into something fundamental, the understanding that we are a part of nature, not separate from it, and that our actions have consequences, not just for us, but for all living things.
There's no denying that humans are having a huge impact on the planet. Deforestation, pollution, burning fossil fuels. We're pushing ecosystems to their limits and putting the future of life on Earth at risk.
Silent Spring reminds us that we have a moral obligation to protect the environment, for ourselves and for future generations. It calls for a change in how we think. It urges us to adopt sustainable practices and to fight for policies that make our planet's health a priority.
It's a message that's even more important now than it was when the book first came out. Now, let's consider the relevance of George Orwell's 1984. In a time of increasing surveillance, data collection, and governments overstepping their bounds, the book's warnings about totalitarianism feel very real.
Orwell's vision of a society ruled by Big Brother, where everything you do is watched and controlled. It's become a cautionary tale for the digital age. With social media, facial recognition technology, and the loss of privacy, the potential for surveillance and control has grown massively.
It's disturbing how easily our personal information can be collected, analyzed, and used for things we might not even know about. The lines between freedom and control are getting blurrier.
You're right. 1984 reminds us that we need to protect our privacy. We have to defend our right to speak freely and resist any attempts to manipulate and control information. It's a call to be aware citizens, to hold those in power accountable, and to protect democracy.
Okay, let's revisit The Diary of a Young Girl. Anne Frank's story still has so much to teach us about tolerance, compassion, and the importance of fighting against hatred and prejudice.
Anne Frank's diary shows how strong the human spirit can be, even in the face of terrible horror. Her words go beyond the Holocaust. They offer a universal message of empathy, understanding, and the importance of standing up to injustice.
It's a heartbreaking reminder of what happens when hatred goes unchecked, and how important it is to fight against discrimination and persecution, no matter who the target is.
It's true. In a world where intolerance and fear of foreigners are growing, Anne Frank's story is a beacon of hope. It's a call for empathy and understanding. It reminds us to never forget the lessons of the past and to challenge prejudice and promote tolerance in our own communities.
Now, let's talk about the lasting impact of Charles Darwin's on the origin of species. The theory of evolution is accepted by most scientists, but it still faces opposition from those who reject scientific evidence because of their religious beliefs.
Darwin's work was revolutionary. It challenged centuries of accepted thought, and it completely changed how we understand nature. But even today, evolution is controversial, especially in some religious groups.
It shows that the conflict between science and religion is still alive, and the theory of evolution often becomes a battleground in that debate.
Yeah, it's important to remember that science is based on evidence and observation. While religious beliefs are often based on faith and tradition, we need to approach these discussions with respect for different views, but we also have to uphold the importance of scientific literacy.
Now let's go back to The Second Sex. The book's exploration of gender roles and women's oppression is still relevant today, especially in the current discussions about gender identity, equality, and dismantling patriarchal structures.
De Beauvoir's work was groundbreaking, and her insights are amazingly relevant today. We're seeing a resurgence of feminist activism. Movements like #MeToo and Time's Up are calling out sexual harassment and assault, and they're advocating for greater gender equality in every part of society.
It's inspiring to see younger generations challenging gender norms and pushing for a world that's more inclusive and fair. They're building on the work of feminists like de Beauvoir.
Exactly. The Second Sex reminds us that the fight for gender equality isn't over. We have to keep challenging the societal structures and cultural norms that create inequality. It's a call to keep pushing, keep demanding better, and never settle for anything less than full equality.
Finally, let's consider To Kill a Mockingbird. Racial tensions are still high. Systemic racism is still a problem. The book's exploration of prejudice, injustice, and moral courage is as powerful as ever.
Absolutely. To Kill a Mockingbird is more than just a coming-of-age story. It's a powerful indictment of racism and a call for empathy and understanding. Atticus Finch, the moral center of the book, shows us how important it is to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard and you face opposition.
It reminds us that even when prejudice and injustice seem overwhelming, we can still choose to do the right thing. It's a message that's just as relevant today as it was when the book came out.
It is. To Kill a Mockingbird reminds us that the fight for racial justice isn't over. It challenges us to confront prejudice, to advocate for equality, and to create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, no matter their skin color.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, it's clear that these books are still incredibly powerful and relevant in the 21st century. They make us think critically about the world. They inspire us to fight for justice and equality, and they encourage us to work towards a future that's more humane and sustainable.
But the question is, how do we take the lessons from these books and put them into action in our own lives? That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into these world-changing books. It's amazing to think about how much these books have impacted the world. From starting revolutions to challenging long-held beliefs, they've really shaped things.
Yeah, it really shows the power of ideas and how words can actually change the course of history. But like we've been talking about, these books don't just affect big historical events, they can also change us as individuals.
Exactly. So for this last part, let's get a bit personal. How can we as individuals actually live out the lessons from these books? How can we take these big ideas and turn them into action in our own lives?
That's the real challenge, right? It's easy to just admire these books, but it's a whole different thing to really live by their principles and make them part of how we live every day.
Okay, let's start with common sense. Paine really believed in reason and individual liberty. It's like he's calling all of us to action.
He's definitely reminding us that we all have a voice and a responsibility to shape our society. It's about being active citizens, not just sitting back and watching things happen.
So what does that look like in real life?
Well, it could mean getting involved in local politics, or maybe volunteering for a cause you care about, or even just having meaningful conversations with your friends and family about important things.
I see. So just being engaged.
Exactly. It's realizing that even our small actions can contribute to positive change, and that we all have a part to play in making the world more just and equitable.
Now, what about Uncle Tom's Cabin? Stowe's book forces us to look at racism and inequality not just in the past, but right now in our world.
You're right. It's a call for us to look at our own biases and learn about the history and impact of racism. And it's a call to stand up for the rights of marginalized communities.
It's a reminder that staying silent can be just as bad as being part of the problem. We can't just hope things will get better. We have to actively fight for social justice.
Absolutely. That might mean supporting organizations that fight racial injustice, or speaking out against discrimination whenever you see it, or just being an ally to those who are marginalized and oppressed. It's about doing something, even if it feels uncomfortable.
And the Communist Manifesto really pushes us to think critically about our economic systems, to ask ourselves, are these systems really helping everyone or just a select few?
Yeah, it's about questioning things and wondering if there are fairer, more just ways to organize our economies. We need to realize that huge wealth inequality isn't inevitable. We can create systems that put people's well-being first, not just the well-being of the privileged few.
So that could mean supporting policies that promote economic equality or advocating for workers' rights.
Exactly, and even being mindful of our own consumption habits and how they affect others. It's about understanding that we're all connected and that our choices have consequences for everyone.
With a vindication of the rights of women, we're reminded that the struggle for gender equality continues. We all have a responsibility to fight against those old patriarchal norms and stand up for the rights of women and girls.
Right. It's about seeing the systemic barriers that women face and working to dismantle them. We need to create a world where women have equal opportunities and are safe from discrimination and violence.
So that might mean supporting organizations that empower women, or mentoring young girls, or even just challenging sexist language and behavior when we see it.
Exactly. It's about building a culture where everyone respects each other and everyone has an equal chance to thrive, no matter their gender.
Silent Spring is a call for us to take care of the environment and support policies that protect our planet.
Yeah, it's about understanding that what we do affects the natural world and that we have a duty to protect the earth for future generations.
That could mean trying to reduce our own impact on the environment, supporting sustainable practices, or advocating for policies that deal with climate change and environmental damage.
It's about making choices that prioritize the long-term health of our planet, not just quick wins. It's understanding that we are a part of nature, not separate from it.
Then there's 1984, which reminds us how important it is to protect our freedoms, our privacy, and resist those who try to manipulate information and control us.
Right. It's about being active citizens who hold those in power accountable. And it's about standing up for democratic values.
That could mean supporting organizations that fight for privacy rights, being careful about what we believe in the media, or even just having thoughtful conversations about how technology is changing our lives and what the ethical implications are.
Exactly. It's about realizing that freedom isn't something we just get. It's something we have to fight for and protect constantly.
And The Diary of a Young Girl reminds us that there's always hope, even when things are incredibly dark. It challenges us to fight hatred and prejudice in every form, to build a world where diversity is valued and everyone feels safe and accepted.
It's a call for empathy, compassion, and understanding. It's about recognizing that we're all part of the human family and that our differences are something to be celebrated, not feared.
So that might mean speaking out against discrimination, supporting organizations that promote tolerance, or just being kind and respectful to everyone we meet.
Absolutely. It's about creating a world where everyone feels like they belong, a world where everyone is included.
Now, with On the Origin of Species, we're encouraged to approach the world with curiosity, to think critically, and be willing to question what we think we know.
Yeah, it's about embracing the scientific method, questioning dogma, and looking for explanations based on evidence.
That could mean keeping up with scientific discoveries, supporting research, or just encouraging a level of learning and exploration in ourselves and others.
It's about recognizing that science is a powerful tool to understand the world and solve problems.
The Second Sex reminds us to keep fighting for gender equality, to create a world where women are empowered and not held back by discrimination.
Exactly. It's about challenging those old stereotypes, demanding equal opportunities, and celebrating what women achieve.
So that might mean supporting organizations that fight for women's rights, mentoring young women, or even just being aware of the language we use and the examples we set for future generations.
It's about building a world where everyone, regardless of gender, has the chance to reach their full potential.
And finally, with To Kill a Mockingbird, we're reminded that we all have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard and even when others disagree.
It's about having the guts to challenge injustice, to speak out against prejudice, and to defend those who are treated unfairly.
So that might mean supporting organizations that fight for social justice, advocating for change, or just having the courage to speak up when we see something wrong.
It's about realizing that we all have a responsibility to make the world a better place, and that even small acts of courage and kindness can have a big impact.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into these powerful books, we hope you're leaving not just with a sense of awe for these works, but also with a feeling that you too have the power to make a difference.
These books aren't just stories or accounts of the past. They offer us pathways to a brighter future.
They remind us that the fight for justice, equality, and a sustainable world is never really over, and that each of us has a part to play in that fight. So go out there, explore these books, think about their messages, and ask yourself, how can you use their wisdom to make a positive impact in your own way? The world needs you to speak up, take action, and commit to creating a better future.